There's a few stats from the 2024 season that I think really define who the New York Giants were last year. I'm going to start with a few regarding them. Their six divisional games last year, the New York Giants lost all six divisional games by a combined deficit of 52 points. Now, that might not seem like a crazy stat, but when you consider the fact that in those six divisional games, the Giants only scored 91 total points, and their total deficit of 52 included a game where they lost by 25 to Philadelphia. It really highlights the fact that, this team was one of the worst scoring offenses we saw, not only in the league, but over the last few years. On average last year as well, on defense, they allowed around 136 rushing yards per game. The book was out on them pretty early after a game against Washington where they allowed over 200 yards. You could run on them easily. If you had a mobile quarterback, you were able to get him on the move. And this team offensively, I think part of the reason they were so bad at scoring, you look at how they tried to attack defenses, this team was tied for 8th in pass attempts last year. And that's a team that had Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, Tim Boyle, and Tommy DeVito. I almost said Danny DeVito. Tommy DeVito as your quarterbacks. And they were tied for 8th in pass attempts in the NFL. Now, the only teams that were ahead of them, and in ascending order, is going to be Seattle, Kansas City, the New York Jets, Las Vegas, Dallas, Cincinnati, and Cleveland. Now, you might be wondering, well, what does it matter to include all of those teams? Well, the other thing that all of these teams have in common is that all of these teams were in the bottom half of the NFL in terms of rushing yards per attempt. So it was a pretty common theme for these teams who had to throw the ball a lot, is because they could not run the ball to save their lives. Now, last year, and this is kind of a stat that shocked me, the New York Giants were trailing for a total of 775 of their 1,063 total snaps. That's about 72.9%. Comparatively, they were leading for 116 of their 1,063 snaps. That's 10.91%. If you take that on a per game average, they have about 62 snaps per game. 45 of those snaps come while they're trailing. 7 come with a lead. So you're basically saying, maybe you score a touchdown to make it 7-0, or maybe you score a field goal to make it 3-0, and the defensive drive of 6 or 7 snaps and then leading to a touchdown. That's about all New York led for last year on average. And then there's also the snaps where it was 0-0. So it's like this team just last year was terrible. They were awful. And that snap stat it kind of stuck with me. It's like it's almost shocking to see like this is what an average game looked like. Almost 75% of their games they were trailing. Like 75% of the time last year they were losing. That seemed awful to me. Now, I'm not going to only talk about the bad stats. I'm going to bring up good stuff as well. Malik Neighbors, obviously the superstar last year for New York. The most catches in a single season in Giants history, and the second most receiving yards in a single season in Giants history, only behind the 2014 year from Odell Beckham Jr. Tyrone Tracy. Now, this is where I bring up some of the good with some of the bad. If you look up from week 5 to week 10 for Tyrone Tracy last year, you look at a portion of the year where he had 95 attempts, 516 rushing yards, 3 touchdowns, 14 receptions, and 76 yards. Averaged out over 17 games, you have a pretty good year where you're looking at a guy possibly as a bell cow running back, a guy who could have almost 1,700 plus all-purpose yards, and a guy who could put the ball in the end zone a lot. Comparatively, if you look at the other 11 games for Tyrone Tracy, You have 97 attempts, 323 yards, 2 touchdowns, 24 catches, and 1 touchdown. Averaged out over 17 games. You have a guy who is, just a rotational back and a guy who really can't be relied on much in the running game. I understand that the first 4 weeks of the year, Tyrone Tracy was very, very seldomly used, and I understand that would skew his stats. But even if you look at after week 10, where, I pulled weeks 5 from 10, he didn't have another game over 60 yards after week 10. So even though those first 4 weeks show he just wasn't used, after that he wasn't really effective either. The whole running game for New York last year was pretty terrible, and it got skewed by the fact that this team was always losing. They didn't really have much time to just try to establish the run. So I kind of understand why Tracy fell off towards the end of the year, but still, that's just kind of how the stats worked out. He played really well in those 6 weeks from 5 to 10, when I think Devin Singletary went down and they needed somebody to step up and play. He did that. He played really well for those 6 weeks, but after that, it was pretty downhill. Going to the defense, Dexter Lawrence last year in 12 games has 9 sacks. Now, all of them do come in the first 7 games. So, after games 8 through 17, he doesn't have a single sack. Brian Burns, a QB hit, tackle for loss, or sack in 13 out of his 17 games last year. That's kind of in the similar realm to guys like TJ Watt and Trey Hendrickson. So to me, that seemed like a good stat for a guy that they traded a second-round pick for and gave up immense draft capital for. I think that was a pretty good first season, and you hope that with what they added this year through the draft and through free agency, that he can become even better if there's maybe less attention spent on him from opposing offensive lines. Now, through free agency this year, I think New York had a pretty established plan in place. They were going to improve this defense, and they were going to make whoever the rookie quarterback coming in, whoever that was going to be, they were going to make sure that there's some veteran presence ahead of him, but not too much of a presence where he can't move up on the depth chart. Now, what do I mean by that? You do sign Russell Wilson, you do sign Jameis Winston. I think there's good and there's bad qualities that those two quarterbacks can kind of show a rookie. You can kind of show Jackson Dart the rights and the wrongs of being an NFL quarterback. There's a lot of good, there's a lot of bad. Defensively, I think the additions of Paulson Adebo and Javon Holland, this duo of corner and safety, Paulson Adebo, to me, after you talk about Carlton Davis, after you talk about DJ Reed from free agency last year, I think Paulson Adebo was maybe the third best corner available, and that's in a cornerback class of the free agent market this year that was loaded. I mean, it's not just Davis, Reed, Adebo, it's guys like Nate Hobbs, it's guys that are really established slot players. That seemed like the main flavor of this year's free agency. So I think that was a really good signing, Adebo and Javon Holland. You also get some other guys that I think up front can really help out between Chauncey Golston, between Roy Robertson Harrison, and between Jeremiah Ledbetter. You have guys that can come in, just be rotational players along that defensive line, fill in with Dexter Lawrence, with Brian Burns, with Kayvon Thibodeau, and make a really solid pass rush and a very good team that can stop the run, comparatively to last year where they were terrible at it. The Giants also re-signed Darius Slayton, Greg Van Roten, Amir Smith-Marset, Aaron Stinney, and Ty Summers. Losses for the New York Giants in free agency this year: Azeez Ojulari, Drew Lock, Jason Pinnock, Adoree Jackson, Isaiah Simmons, Patrick Johnson, and Tim Boyle. Now, I really liked Jason Pinnock. I really liked Isaiah Simmons. For whatever reason, neither of them were able to figure it out with the New York Giants. Isaiah Simmons hasn't really been able to figure it out anywhere he's gone, and now he's in Green Bay. I hope he does well, But it just, maybe I'm just wrong about Isaiah Simmons. Through the draft for New York this year, they get Abdul Carter and Jackson Dart in the first round. They come back in the third and fourth rounds with Darius Alexander out of Toledo and Cam Scadabo from Arizona State. They finish off with some offensive line help in Marcus Mbow from Purdue, Thomas Fedone from Nebraska at tight end, and Corey Black from Oklahoma State at cornerback. The obvious talking point is Jackson Dart and Abdul Carter, but I love the Darius Alexander pick. I love it. You have now, between Thibodeau, Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, now you bring in Abdul Carter. Now you also get Darius Alexander, who is kind of a not as well-known prospect, but, he's kind of great. He was kind of great last year at Toledo. He had multiple games last year where he just wrecked the opposing offensive line, the opposing offensive game plan, and it wasn't just getting to the quarterback. It was getting after the run. It was stopping everything that came his way. He was incredible last year. And so now you got 5 or 6 guys on that defensive line who you can rely on to get to the quarterback or stop the run. And again, for a team that was just absolutely awful at stopping the run last year, that's a needed position to be addressed. So here's where we kind of preview the 2025 season for New York. If you see my video detailing the 10 toughest schedules in the NFL, you've already seen this for the Giants. A pretty rigorous schedule, to say the least. And I think the toughest part about it is we just don't know when we're going to see Jackson Dart take the field. It could be week 1. It could be not until week 15 when they come back from their bye. Or maybe it's like somewhere in the middle. I don't really know when the best time would be for him to step in there. When you have the toughest schedule in the NFL, I don't know if you necessarily just want to throw your rookie quarterback into the fire, especially a rookie quarterback that I think we all agree needs some time to develop. He needs some time to grow as a quarterback in the NFL. And to me, it just doesn't seem like a great idea at any point in this season for him to be in the lineup. I mean, maybe you bring him in like for mop-up duty in the fourth quarters of this year's games. Like if you're down 20 plus points, it's going to be Jackson Dart time. That's kind of the thing I think would be best. You get him some time to actually see defenses in a real game without making it just be like, hey, if we lose this game, it's on you. You kind of put him in a position where it's like, there's no pressure. It's not like we're going to lose even worse. You lose or you win. It's not like losing by 20 feels any worse than losing by 1. So it's like, I just feel like schedule-wise, this is pretty tough to throw in a quarterback of Jackson Dart's stature. And so I don't know when we see him. I think a floor for this team, I'm going to set it pretty low because I do still think, the issues that Tyrone Tracy had last year, I think they were kind of offensive line issues. I know they bring in James Hudson and they bring back Greg Van Roten and Aaron Stinney, but I still just don't see how this offensive line is much better than last year. Andrew Thomas is still an often injured left tackle. Greg Van Roten, he played fine last year. John Michael Schmitz came in as a center and he played fine. And now you have, hopefully, your right tackle in James Hudson. And I just don't know, And so I'm going to set the bar pretty low for them. I'm going to set it at 4 wins, 1 above where they got last year. This is mostly because of how difficult this schedule is. I see the New Orleans Saints as a probable win, and that's really it. I would say Las Vegas, but they got to go to Vegas. And so I'm like, I don't know. I don't really know my feelings on Vegas yet. But you have these you have your obvious 6 divisional games. You have your games against Kansas City on Sunday Night Football, at Denver, against San Francisco, at Chicago. against Green Bay, at Detroit, at New England. I don't see a very easy route for them to get more than 4 wins, to be honest with you. And even if everything hits for New York, they still are just not that great of a team. So I'm going to set their ceiling at 7 wins. They're, like I said, they're just not that good of a team. Even if Jackson Dart comes in, if he's the rookie of the year and Malik Neighbors is offensive player of the year and all of this other stuff, I just don't see how they are that good of a team. The defense could be really, really good this year. I think the defense could be great. A top 10, top 5 unit when you talk about the pass rush, when you talk about hopefully improving the run stopping of this team. They could be a really good unit. But you're going to be possibly going through a revolving door at quarterback between Russell Wilson, between Jameis Winston, and between Jackson Dart, who, look, honestly, through the draft process, I didn't really like Jackson Dart. I'll just be honest with you. I think he fits New York. I think he's going to come in and he'll play fine. But I just didn't like Jackson Dart when you compared him to the other quarterbacks available in this year's draft. And so, I'm also kind of wary of that. And the running back game. If Tyrone Tracy only has a few good games again this year, it's not like that we're going to be a good running team either. And if we're forced to be a top 5, top 10 passing team in terms of attempts again this year, I really don't see how New York is going to get more than 6 or 7 wins this year as a ceiling. But if you ask me, that's probably the perfect place for New York to be at after 2025. Somewhere between 4 and 7 wins, where you're still picking in the top 10 of the draft in 2026. You come back and have another solid year in free agency next year, but this time have it be on the offensive side of the ball where you're adding better offensive line help, you're adding more weapons, you're probably adding another running back, and you let the defensive guys develop. I think it kind of gets lost on people with the defenders that New York has. You know, Kayvon Thibodeau is still pretty young. Brian Burns is still very, very young. Abdul Carter is going to come in. He's very, very young. Dexter Lawrence is really the main veteran on that, not just defensive line, but the defense. Now you have Paulson Adebo. Now you have Javon Holland in the back end. Like, this is a young defense. And you know, it's guys that got drafted last year that played a lot for this defense. So it's like, we just need to let the defense develop into that good, great core that they could have. And in 2026 and beyond, this could be a team that's in the 10-plus win category. But for now, that's just not where I see them. And that's not a bad thing. Like I said, I think that's kind of where they need to be so they can continue to develop with top-tier talent and make the New York Giants back into one of the best teams in the NFC.